I've got some astonishing news for you. Someone on this desk thinks Newcastle are going to finish fourth, and he predicted it as well. Look, he's ready to defend himself. Go on, let's hear why you had Newcastle finishing fourth in the Premier League.
I mean, is it that wild when they finished fourth a couple of seasons ago?
Considering you've got Liverpool, City, Arsenal, and then
they're boxed off, yeah.
Yeah, and then your fourth spot is between Chelsea, who basically spent all the money in the bank. You've got Tottenham, who've improved their squad. Then Newcastle. Your team, Aston Villa, brother.
Well, we'll be fifth. And that'll be enough.
And you've got United as well, with all this money being spent.
No.
So
right, I'll tell you why. Newcastle last season were decimated by injuries, obviously in the Premier European competition as well, in the Champions League. It was a really, really difficult season, and in a way it was a season that just didn't suit Eddie Howe's brand of football. You go back to the season before with no European competition, Newcastle, particularly at home, so dangerous. Not many teams will go to St James's Park and pick up points. So my thought is that Newcastle will be more similar to that version of Newcastle than they will to the version that we saw last season. They haven't added loads, but I think if you look through their squad, I think if people do stay fit, I think they do have enough. I think they've got one of the best strikers in the league in Isak. Anthony Gordon on the left is always a danger. I'd expect them to go back to the mode of keeping clean sheets. They need to sort the defence out because, again, they've got injuries there at the moment. Don't know whether they'll sign anyone on the last day of the window. Bruno's still there. They're evolving in a way with Livramento and Hall at fullback. I just think you'll see a Newcastle that's more like the Newcastle we saw in the season before last.
See, my only concern is, we've spoken about this, whether Eddie Howe can take them any further. Because I thought they were going to have a window, or something was going to happen where you go, this is the new version of them. I still feel like they're going through the paces really slow, like you said, like they're evolving the fullback areas. But then they're still very samey. So far this season, they've been quite drab and stodgy and boring to watch. I wonder if Eddie Howe is just not the right man for them to go to the next point.
I think if backed financially, he could be, but they're in an interesting position, Newcastle, because effectively they're the richest club in the world, but they can't spend as much money as they'd like to spend. And as a result of that, you look at their predicted starting 11 for the game against Spurs on the weekend, no improvement since last season. Of course, players are coming back from injury. Nick Pope missed a lot of last season through injury. But they're aside, and Tonali is also going to be available in short order, and that'll be a huge return for them. But they haven't improved their squad. They haven't improved their starting 11, and everybody else, maybe barring Liverpool, but brought in Chiesa, have. And so I think top four is going to be a stretch for them. I think it's going to be a difficult season for Newcastle. I don't even know if, again, you don't hope or wish this upon anybody, but I don't know if Eddie Howe lasts the season because there is so much expectation at Newcastle because they are a big club. But I don't know if they've brought in players or enough reinforcements to say that they're better than the Spurs, for example, who they take on the weekend. The last time they did play Spurs, though, we saw Alexander Isak make Van der Ven do the Spinaroonie, and I don't think Van der Ven ever recovered from that. And so they've got a good chance in this game against Spurs, and this is a Spurs side that I know they've got a big win against Everton, but I'm not too sure about them either. But this is a Newcastle team I think needs reinforcements between now and the end of the window, and I don't think they're going to get it.
Spurs are interesting because I think with Newcastle, all three of us have three very different opinions. But I think if we all spoke about Ange Ball and spoke about Spurs, I think we're all pretty aligned. They're a good side, entertaining to watch, still loose in possession sometimes. Solanke obviously injured, so I think that alters their style a little bit. They've brought in Kulusevski into a right-sided 8 position, which is I found really weird because he struck me as someone who needs space in behind fullbacks. Where are you with this Spurs team at the moment?
Their midfield is where I look at them and think that they're not quite right. I watched the Leicester game, and obviously they blew them away in the first half, but only scored one. And then in the second half, you know, once they conceded, you felt they might concede again. I just look at that midfield area and just think there's there's something missing in there. Bentancur's a fantastic player, but I feel like injuries have caught up with him a little bit. Basuma came in last weekend and scored. I think look at Tottenham last week. You can't really read too much into it because Everton are poor right now. They're going through a difficult moment. He lined up with kind of Maddison and Kulusevski as free 8s in front of Basuma, playing as a 6. Long term going forward, I don't think you can do that. Playing against better teams, you will get picked off if you play in that manner. I know the fullbacks step into midfield and offer support, but I think Spurs, if they carried on to do that, would be too easy to get at. I think Solanke will make a huge difference then, but he's injured at the moment. I just look at their attacking options and they're kind of much of a muchness, but there's a lot of them. So I think it's going to be a struggle to keep people happy. They were bringing people off the bench in the first game that I'd forgotten were there. They've added Odegaard, who I think will do well to the mix as well. But I just look at Spurs and I just think, you know, good teams have that premier midfielder. I don't think Spurs have that.
It's an odd situation because Maddison in the first part, was it first part of last season?
Yeah,
he was
it was amazing.
absolutely unbelievable. And the second part of last season, he just wasn't at it.
Got injured, didn't he? In the Chelsea game, wasn't the same.
Yeah,
since.
that Chelsea game killed him, actually.
Yeah.
If that game didn't happen, I don't know. The season would have been so different
They
for
were
him.
challenging for the title, apparently.
Yeah.
And
Was that the game Van der Ven went down?
Van der Ven went down. Yeah, Romero got suspended.
sent off.
Yeah.
It was just such a bizarre game for him. I wonder, they go to Newcastle, St. James's Park. Newcastle, as I mentioned, weren't great against Southampton. But then I look at this game and I go, this might be a game where Spurs go, if we win this one, people start looking at us very differently. Because at the moment, I think everyone's kind of going, they're flirting with the top four potentially. They might be there or thereabouts, they might not quite get in there. If you go to St. James's Park and leave a mark on this sort of fixture early in the season,
huge.
Old school mentality, but I'm like, yeah, you've got one in there.
You're right with it, man. You're right. You're an old head for a reason, man. I think
Old head?
He's younger than me, I think.
But you're right. For both of these teams, I think that's applicable. If Newcastle win this game against Spurs, the side that I believe will finish ahead of them, there's 2 wins out of 3 in the league before the international break, unbeaten still, despite the fact that you haven't had scintillating performances. And you go into the international break full of confidence, but despite the fact that the transfer window has been pretty poor. Same for Spurs as well. Should have won the Leicester game. Everybody knows that. Everybody watched it. But smashed Everton 4-0. And if you beat Newcastle away from home, then you go into the international break full of confidence. And so this is... It might end up being a must not lose for both sides. Both sides might shake hands in 70 minutes and say, let's take a draw in this one, just to go into the...
I mean, looking at the previous head-to-heads, that doesn't look right.
Go through them, the crazy.
Newcastle 4-0, Spurs 4-1, Newcastle 6-1, Spurs 2-1, Spurs 5-1. If this game ends a draw, Kweku, it's because of Kweku, because every game's been like incredible. Was it the Newcastle 6-1 where it was basically like everything Newcastle touched was going in?
Just after Conte had left, wasn't it?
Yeah, so like they were all over.
And that was the last time we saw Lloris. Was that
Lloris's
last game? Got hooked at half time.
Yeah, that was a bad day for him because Fraser Foster came on, didn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
So I look at that and I kind of go, I don't envision a draw because I think both teams really want to win.
Yeah.
But I do wonder with Spurs, like you said, like the balance in midfield, it's probably that's the one area where Newcastle are actually really strong.
Yeah.
Bruno Guimaraes, Tonali will be playing, I'd imagine, up against Maddison, Kulusevski and Bissouma. I'd back Newcastle's midfield. But then Spurs' forward line against Newcastle's back line. It's so difficult to predict this game.
Yeah. I like Newcastle's midfield. I think they've got good variety in there, but you do look at the defence that, predicted defence here, Livramento, Kraft, Burn and Kelly. And I think if they have everyone fit Newcastle, they keep a lot of clean sheets. That back four isn't with everyone fit. So I do think there'll be goals in this game, but I do think Newcastle will have enough to beat Spurs. My belief is Newcastle are a better team than Spurs.
Interesting.
That's why I didn't come forth. It's not like
I'm like baffled because I've just not been convinced by Newcastle for the last 12 months. So far away from being convinced as well. And I really like Spurs and I like what Angie's doing. And we've sat on a show so many times after a Spurs game and how have they lost that game? Because they play really well in games like the Leicester game. And with Newcastle, I often go, how have they won that game? Because they don't play well and win games. So it's kind of like the opposites going up against each other. Predictions, what are you saying?
I'm going for a draw in this one. I'm going for a 2-2 draw, though. I think Spurs have just got better options off the bench. We haven't talked about Bergvall. We haven't talked about a lot of these players that they've got that have gone under the radar. They've got a very, very strong squad, and I think they'll have enough to go and get a point at St. James's Park, but it'll be a thriller.
3-1 Newcastle. Newcastle in transition. I think that front three of Gordon, Isak and Barnes, there's one thing you can do against Spurs. You can catch them in transition. And with Gumara's on the pitch as well, who can pick a pass. I think in transition, Newcastle win that game.
I'm going to say 3-1 Spurs. One of us is going to look like an idiot because I think in transition is where Newcastle have been really wasteful so far this season. So, but I do think like Barnes, Gordon, Isak, they've got the players for it. But I just really back Spurs.